I'm bored, hate waste, and I love being cheap. And one of the most fun ways to be cheap and reduce waste is taking cheap business hardware, injecting some advertiser-friendly, nondescript drugs into it, and seeing how far you can push it in games and other various tasks. I've noticed there's a pretty significant class of business desktops that are normally completely left out of the conversation due to some limitations. That would be these old used mini PCs, and well, sometimes ideas should just simply stay ideas. In order to save some money and generate less waste, let's see just how far we can push this poor little business PC. All right, so what do I got going on here? This is a Dell Optiplex 3050 Micro, a tiny PC quite literally the size of my hand. These came in many configurations with all sorts of different things and stuff going on, but this one specifically has an i5 7500T, 8GB of 2400 MHz DDR4, no storage at all, and a 65 watt power supply, and not much of really anything else. And this cute little speaker that sounds terrible and randomly just goes off. Plus a decent amount of USB ports, and look at that, HDMI and DisplayPort. This is all trivial, boring stuff though. There is one really nifty thing that is the reason I got this little guy. This CPU is socketed, which is absolutely awesome. You can change the CPU in a micro PC. I mean, just looking at it is so weird. And bonus points, this takes both SATA and M.2 SSDs, or I guess hard drives if you want to do that, I don't know. And has this funny little slot for a Wi-Fi card upgrade thing. Strange. So what are my plans? Well, I want to see how far I can push this without spending an unreasonable amount of money. So first things first, adding RAM, super simple. Due to the size constraints, this takes SODIMMs though rather than full-size DIMMs of RAM. And honestly, I think that's kind of cool. We have a desktop socketed CPU paired with SODIMMs. I mean, damn. That does limit our choices a little bit though. But either way, this is 16GB of 3200 MHz RAM, and it doesn't really matter since the speed is capped at 2400 MHz either way with no way to increase the speed as far as I can tell due to Dell's lockdown BIOS. But either way, I did get an extra 8GB of RAM, even if it's not as fast as it should be. The plan for this video was to upgrade the CPU, but there's kind of a problem with that. This only supports 35 watt CPUs, which means these on screen right now are your options. Not many. So I figured maybe I'll find another Optiplex with a higher supported TDP, like the 7050 Micro. But that comes with a whole other set of problems. If you want one for a similar price to the 3050, you either have to go bare bones, which has a different set of problems I'll get to in a minute, or get one with a lower powered 35 watt CPU, which is perfectly fine. We're smart. We can change a socketed CPU, but Dell left a little surprise here for us. The 7050s with the lower 35 watt TDP CPUs, they do not have the right cooling or power supply to actually upgrade to those 65 watt chips. So when you buy one of these 7050s, you have to get one with the 65 watt CPU from the factory and upgrade that CPU. But the problem is those are very expensive, usually over double the cost of a 7050 with a 35 watt CPU. And if you already have a 65 watt CPU, there's not really much of an upgrade path. Maybe if you have one and it's able to go to an i7 7700, you could do that, but those CPUs go for almost $100 all day long, meaning you're gonna be almost $300 into this thing without even adding any extra RAM storage or even like a graphics card. So this is where we landed. A $60 Optiplex 3050 with the i5 7500T. And what was that? Graphics card? Just wait. First, let's change out the thermal paste really quick. And I don't know if it'll do anything, but it's a nice peace of mind thing. There really wasn't a ton here. So also I want to add, since I skimmed over it, you do have quite a few storage options here. So there really is a lot of opportunity to make a decent server here, even if it's not the biggest ever. Most servers really don't need a ton of compute power. And with this guy consuming only 35 watts under a heavy CPU load, this is a pretty power efficient setup and has enough power to quite easily run a few basic programs. I mean, I even threw a basic Minecraft server on here and it ran really, really well. And with DDR4 SODIMMs being somewhat cheap, you can easily allocate 8 gigs of RAM just to a server on its own and have it run really well. Plus, if you're anything like me and have a laptop, phone, and desktop, and you want to share some basic files between the three, you can get a cheap M.2 boot SSD for like 20 bucks or something, And then you could get a used 2.5-inch hard drive to put in there. And you can get some pretty big ones too. For around $40 to $50, you can get a 2 terabyte, 2.5-inch hard drive to put in there and have way more than enough storage for most people. So you can host stuff like Word docs, TV shows, movies, or even something just really simple like a small backup server for your important files. Plus, I mean, if you wanted to, you could completely max this thing out with flash storage and get up to 16 terabytes of usable storage. Even more if you didn't care about bandwidth and wanted to put one of those funky M.2 to SATA adapters in. I don't really know if they work, but you could fit a lot of storage on here with one of those. It's time, no more teasing. This is an RX 6600. And it's time to add this guy into the mix. After I fix one more issue. The wall adapter I bought for this was supposed to work, but my CPU is being capped at 800 megahertz. It is horrible. I hate it. So if you get one of these, don't buy an aftermarket adapter like I did. Just suck it up, pay an extra 10 bucks and get one from Dell because wow, we are really at the point of proprietary wall jacks. That sucks. Okay, but now the GPU. And yeah, it's like twice the size of this whole system, but who cares? The only way to add this is using the Wi-Fi expansion card slot with this handy dandy little eGPU adapter. This is the, I hate doing this. EXP GDC TH3P4, a product named to be as forgettable and difficult to say as possible. This is actually the one I used for my T430 video where I added a GPU to that, but this time I got a mini PCI cable for it rather than express card like I had before. So let's plug the power in, plop on the GPU, hook this weird cable to the HDMI slot, I don't know how that works, and hook power directly up to the GPU, and nothing. I kind of thought it'd be easy for once. It wasn't showing up at all, so I tried to install AMD drivers and it couldn't detect the card and Windows didn't see it at all. So I figured let's update Windows. Updated Windows, let it restart, and hey, look at that. Now I can install my AMD drivers, and oh man, we are good to freaking go. This doesn't seem to be a plug and play solution though. You have to restart the entire thing whenever you want to use the eGPU or switch between the eGPU and the internal GPU, which I mean, it isn't surprising all things considered, but it can be annoying. Just remember to not be like me and hook up to the GPU instead of the iGPU. Yeah, I spent an hour doing benchmarks and had it plugged into the iGPU and had to completely redo it. What a pain in the ass. The M.2 slots are also really finicky. The Wi-Fi one is really loose and the cord slips out all the time. And the NVMe slot is really tight. Well, I mean, it was. I shoved my SSD in there really hard and now it fits just fine. Don't do that at home. Or with your... NVIDIA also sucks, so I could not get an NVIDIA GPU to work. NVIDIA truly is a company. So with that over, let's finally get to some testing. My expectations aren't crazy high, but if there is pretty much any improvement at all, I'll call it a win because it'll save this little guy from going into a landfill potentially for a little bit longer. So let's start out with a softball as usual. BioShock Infinite, that's how I put that in the script. 1080p Ultra, it ran really great and was totally playable with an average of 88 FPS and a 1% low of, well, 9. Runs great till there's a giant stutter, then not so great. Which isn't great, but what if we took the GPU out of this equation and saw how it would run stock? Well, it got an average of 50 FPS with a 1% low of 26, and wow, we are really not off to a great start. But BioShock is pretty easy to run, so let's just look at some other games before we get ahead of ourselves. So for the game someone joined my Discord, just tell me I suck at, Doomer Eternal, join my Discord. Here we got an average of 56 FPS with 1% lows of 15. It was actually a pretty solid experience until we would get a pretty big stutter, but I mean, is this GPU even doing anything? Like, let's see. So I went ahead, took the GPU out again, and went back to the iGPU, where we got an average of 8. Not 80, 8 FPS with a 1% low of 6. Completely unplayable, not even remotely close. Just horrible. So yeah, the GPU is doing quite a lot. It's not even close. And I also did not want to subject myself to using the iGPU anymore, so I didn't. Next up, a game that really shouldn't be tested for this situation, Minecraft 1.20.4 with the seed chair, so creative, wow. 1080p, 12 chunks, all that, average of 120 FPS with a 1% low of 0.7. Really playable actually when staying still or moving slowly, but when you just start like walking or running, it all falls apart and it's terrible. Like my life. Using some performance enhancement mods though, it would probably be fine, so I wouldn't worry about it. Anyways, GTA 5, high settings, 1080p, averaged out at 111 FPS with a 1% low of 38. Finally, a game that was super playable. I dig it. If you lower the settings a little bit, capped your FPS, you are all good to go here. So moving on. Red Dead Redemption 2 was pretty smooth even with low FPS, came in with an average of 73 FPS with a 1% low of 18. Some pretty rough stuttering in a lot of these games, but maybe it's something you could overcome with some settings tweaks. Then last, but kind of least actually, Fortnite, 1080p, medium preset, crazy long loading zones to the point every time I played it for benchmarking, it did not load until the game started and I was just in free fall on the corner of the map. This alone kind of makes it unplayable for me, but I did get an average FPS of 67 with 1% lows of 18. Not the worst experience. I mean, if it's what you got, it's what you got. But without any bottlenecks, the RX 6600 can pretty easily play Fortnite. So this is just from the CPU really not being ideal and using baby PCIe instead of big boy PCIe 16X. Honestly, I'm pretty impressed with this. I think an RX 6600 is overkill for this build though, I will say, but we did get some pretty decent performance from this setup. Ideally, lowering the settings and capping the frame rate would be the way to go though, to help with the stuttering a little bit, or just leaving your frame rate uncapped and just dealing with it. I don't know. This poor low power 35 watt i5 stayed pegged at 100%, way more than I would really prefer. I think something like an RX 6500 or I mean honestly an RX 580 8GB would be a great combination for this setup, if for some reason you wanted this setup for gaming. But if you did, check out my links in the description, affiliate and all that. Money. So what about non-gaming stuff? I did some synthetic tests starting with Blender BMW, which finished in 56 seconds. Wow. That was pretty fast. But did the GPU improve it at all? Maybe it's just really quick. I don't know. So how long did it take without? Oh, right. That's longer for sure. Ouch. That I'm not even going to wait. That is going to take forever. Oh. Okay, Cinebench. This really has nothing to do with the GPU, but I wanted to test it. It took absolutely forever and we got a score of 3078. Not the worst, but for the value, kind of not amazing either. All right. So this does game decently, and the graphics card does add a ton of performance for productivity. But the question is there a point in doing this? Well, a big part of the problem is getting the adapter for the GPU. That really adds to the cost of this thing. It's about $100 to $130 for it, plus the charger is about another $20. Then you need to get a GPU, which depending on what you want to do is going to run from $80 to $180, just really depending on your setup. You are most likely going to be around the high 200s to low $300 range for the setup, all in. And I mean, if you already have a mini PC laying around, or get one for really cheap or free, ideally, this could be a sick way to repurpose old hardware, but it would be way smarter to just get a regular Optiplex and do what everyone else does and throw a low power GPU in there like a 1650. Or if you want, get something like a ThinkStation P520 with a Xeon Scalable and throw in a $150 GPU in there. It would be about the same price as this, and which, I mean, if you want to see some Xeon Scalable action, subscribe. It's coming.